One Wish by Winslow Swan. Audiobook narrated and produced by Edward James Beesley. Have you ever made a wish? Remember the old saying about being careful what you wish for? I sure do. My wish was granted, and I have regretted it ever since. It was just an off-the-wall comment made in the wrong place, and definitely at the wrong time. Sometimes, I just wish that I could keep my mouth shut. My name is George Reynolds, and I have a whopper of a story to tell. I hope that perhaps you can help me, but I have come to realize that no one can help me. That is, no one but the person who put me in the position that I find myself in. You see, I was just your average run-of-the-mill citizen of this city, working at a rather menial job and living in a low-rent apartment along with all the other weirdos that inhabit the building. For instance, on the third floor, directly above me, is a lovely couple, Mr. and Mrs. Kravitz, who make their living by falling down in a major department store and keeping their attorney very busy. Yes, they are both two of the loveliest female fall-down artists that you would ever hope to meet. Then, lest we forget, Professor Kitzel, who spends much of his time working out to the last decimal point the validity of cabbage on the human diet. He claims that he is being pursued by agents from the government. When pressed, he won't explain which government, only gives you a wink as if you were supposed to know without explanation. My landlady, Mrs. Vera Swanson, claims that she used to be in motion pictures and on the Broadway stage. She spends most of her days in fancy dresses and heavy makeup, as if she were waiting for the director to call action. In fact, she has never been to California or New York to anyone's knowledge. But we tolerate the charade because, she's nice to everybody. Then there's me, George Reynolds, the only one in the building who has a job. Well, had a job, I mean. Well, there lies the crutch of the whole matter. I rarely have a job for more than a few hours after I've destroyed some piece of equipment or hit a manager in the nose or screamed at a customer for being so blatantly stupid. I shall never forget the day when I came home from the local restaurant after dropping 5 dishes of food all over the local judge, slipping on said food and careening into the deputy sheriff, knocking him through the plate glass window of the establishment. No charges were pressed since I wound up with a black eye from said judge. And there was Mrs. Swanson at the door. She was dressed in a gold silk dress that barely covered her ample cleavage and enough makeup to keep Avon happy for the next year. "Lost another one, George?" she asked, knowing the answer already. "Yes, I don't know what it is, but I can't seem to find my niche," I told her. "You're a klutz, George, but a lovable one," she said as she pressed her large lips against my cheek, leaving much of a pink shade on me. I smiled and made my way inside. "Hey, George," Mrs. Kravitz called down from the stairs. "Molly broke her ankle and I have a sprain. Can you get us some milk from the store later?" "No problem," I called back. "They're going to have the place shut down," I heard Mrs. Swanson say from behind me. "What?" I said, stopping in my tracks. "Got the word today," she said, prancing around the stairs. "We all have to move by the 3rd of next month, unless—" She trailed off and became starry-eyed, remembering something that had absolutely nothing to do with the problem at hand. She did this often and would come right back to the conversation as if nothing had happened. "Unless what, Mrs. Swanson?" "Oh, unless we can buy the building. Impossible, I know." She made her way to her own apartment on the first floor. I was dumbfounded. How could the owner just throw us all out on the street like that? "Mrs. Swanson," I called out to her. "Yes, George?" "How much do we need?" Well, I don't have $30,000, and I'm pretty sure that you don't either. So what's the point? Perhaps I shall go back to New York and try for that off-Broadway show, you know. I think it's called Hair. $30,000? And not $1 million or $1 trillion. I walked back into the sunshine on that fateful day. I never noticed the little man that stood on the bottom of the steps looking up at me. I vaguely remember what he looked like, a sort of short and stocky man with a weird type of mustache that covered his mouth completely. That and the sort of twinkle in his eye as he watched me in my dazed state. I wanted to scream, to yell at the world, to blame someone for this travesty that now faced all of us. I pleaded with a higher power to send an angel and make all of the misfortune go away. I wish I could produce money from my fingertips, I yelled out. Granted, I heard the little man say before walking away. Or at least I think that was what he said. Hey, I called after him, but he had already turned the corner and disappeared from view. I got the crazy notion of running after him, but decided to go back inside. I made my way in a stupor to my own apartment, a one-room closet that included a bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom that you couldn't drown a mouse in. I sat on the bed and sighed heavily. Maybe I could rob a bank. No, I don't have a criminal mind. I'd be caught in a second, and I said that I wanted money. I snapped my fingers and the $100 bill flooded to the floor. I stared down at the green paper. Franklin staring back up at me. I poked it with my foot, wondering if it might jump up and bite me. I slowly reached down and picked it up. I turned it over in my hands, felt the texture, and tried to remember all the things they said a counterfeiter could not do. I had only seen a $100 bill once in my life, when I had sold a stamp that I had had in a small collection to a dealer who promptly told me that the thing was worth over $20,000. Of course, that was after I had signed the bill of sale. Looks real, I muttered. I thought that maybe it had blown in through the open window, but I looked over and saw the window was closed. It has to be a joke, I said, and snapped my fingers again. Another bill floated to the floor. Okay, who the hell is doing this? I jumped up, yelling at no one. Stop fooling around! I snapped my fingers again, and another bill of similar denomination flooded to the floor. I sat back down on the bed, the first bill still in my hand and two more laying placidly on the floor, mocking me with that damnable stare that the artist had put on Ben's face. I picked up the other two bills. $300? Just by snapping my fingers? I said. I smiled. I spent most of that day and night snapping my fingers. Hello, George, Mrs. Swanson called to me as I tugged on the suitcase. Moving already? No, Mrs. Swanson, but I would like to know who I have to see to buy this building. Well, that would be Mr. Franklin at the bank down the street, she said, pointing in the general direction. Thank you, I said with a sly grin, kissing her on her rouged cheek. You're welcome, George. Are you prepared to buy that dump? Mr. Franklin asked me when I was finally shown into his office, suitcase and all. That is precisely correct. I understand that the mortgage, including interest, comes to around $120,000? I asked. Not an exact amount, but close enough. From my understanding, there is no one in the building, including yourself, that has that kind of... His eyes widened in shock and disbelief. As I opened the case, it was filled with $100 bills, neatly stacked and bundled, tied with different colored rubber bands that I had managed to scrounge up from around the apartment. After I ran out of those, I used paper clips. It's all there, and then some, I told him.
This is most irregular,
he said, eyeing the money the entire time. I'm sure that we can come to some understanding, I said.
Of course, Mr. Reynolds,
he said, finally looking up at me and smiling. I felt pretty good as I walked out of the bank, feeling as if the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. I relaxed and put a little pep in my step, so to speak. I patted the pocket of my worn coat that held the papers claiming complete ownership of the building to the present residences. I thought about the power that I now possessed of making money appear from thin air with just a snap of my fingers. And what could I do with such power?
Hey, buddy, can you spare a few bucks?
I turned to the rather disreputable character that had accosted me and interrupted my daydreaming. He looked seedy and dirty with unkempt hair and a long beard. His clothes smelled, and I found myself wrinkling my nose. I was about to turn and walk the other way, something that I rarely did, for I was always giving out my loose change to people on the street that had found themselves in that predicament through no fault of their own. A few bucks, of course, I said as I quietly snapped my fingers inside my pocket. Pulling out the $100 bill, I handed it to him, and with a very appreciative handshake, I drew the line at a hug. He ran down the street as I made my way home. The strange thing about money is that when you don't have it, no one wants to really know you. But when you suddenly have it, everyone wants to be your friend, or in some cases, they are prepared to hold the knife as they slide it into your back. That was what happened to me, you see. I was accosted by several more street people that were very happy to take my money. I snapped my fingers inside my pocket so many times that my fingers were getting sore. Eventually, I had to get away and finally made it back to the safety of my own apartment. I experimented that evening with each hand and wondered if it were only $100 bills or whether I could produce other denominations. To my delight, I found that by thinking of the bill, I could produce it. Of course, if I had never seen what the bill actually looked like a $1,000 bill, I couldn't do it. All I got was a blank piece of paper. The easiest one to produce was the $20 and $10 bills, and by the time I got to bed, I had a few $1,000s piled on the floor. I slept very peacefully that evening, dreaming of all the people that I could help with my newfound power. What woke me up the next morning was the pounding on my door, jolting me out of a rather wonderful dream that included a secluded beach and a very attractive bikini-clad islander. "Just a second," was all I could get out before the door burst open.
"You, sir, are under arrest,"
the detective with the very large gum barked at me. "May I get my pants on?" I asked him.
"Hurry up. I got a nice cell waiting for you downtown,"
he said as he eyed the money on the floor. The room was just like you might see on television, complete with the two-way mirror, the tables, the chairs, one for me and two others for the detectives, and of course the handcuffs that bit into my wrists. After a long time of sitting there, wondering what I had been arrested for, the man who had arrested me came into the room. Closing the door, he laid a folder on the table, along with 3 plastic bags, each holding a bill from my room.
"My name is Detective Charles Grayson, Mr. Reynolds. I want you to know that this conversation is being recorded. You do not have to make a statement of any kind or even talk to me until you confer with a lawyer. Do you understand?"
he said, his eyes looking into mine. He was an overbearing sort of man, wide in the shoulders and extremely fit. He must have been in his early 30s, with brown hair cut short and piercing hazel eyes. "Yes, sir," I said softly.
"Are you willing to discuss with me the charges that have been levied against you?"
"Well," I began, I guess so. If I only knew what the charges were." He opened the folder and glanced at the first page.
"You are being charged,"
he said, reading from the folder,
"with bank robbery and counterfeiting. Do you recognize the contents of these evidence bags?"
Yes, sir?
Are you sure?
Yes. They must have come from the floor of my apartment. But you don't understand.
When did you commit the robbery of the bank?
I became incensed. I have never broken the law in my life, I yelled.
Now calm down, Mr. Reynolds. We don't know how you did it. We have no video evidence, but the bills definitely came from the bank that you were at yesterday. We just want to know how you did it,
he said, a slight grin coming across his face. Well, how do you know that they came from the bank I was in?
Yesterday, before you came in, I was working a report of a major robbery that had happened the night before. The money had just disappeared from the vault without any explanation. Then you came in with the exact amount of money that was taken. So, being the detective that I am, I put 2 and 2 together.
Came up with 5, I said sarcastically. I know you were never going to believe me, but I did not steal any money from any bank.
Then where did the money come from? Did you just snap your fingers and make it appear?
Well, now that you mention it, I raised my hand as much as I could with the restraints and snapped my fingers. A single $100 bill appeared. The detective was speechless.
How the hell did you... My God!
He exclaimed, looking down at the evidence bags on the table. I looked as well and couldn't believe what I was seeing. The bag that had originally contained the $100 bill had vanished.
What are you, some kind of magician?
He asked, credulously. No, I don't know how it happens. I just snapped my fingers and... Again, a bill disappeared and reappeared in my hand.
Stop that!
He yelled at me. Look, I can do it all day long, I said as I continued to snap my fingers. More and more bills began to pile up on the table.
I said, stop that!
He yelled again, and I acquiesced.
Now look, Mr. Reynolds, what you are doing is impossible,
he said, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. No, just improbable, I told him. After a few hours, they decided to drop the charges as long as the money had been returned to the bank. Of course, that still left the problem of paying the mortgage on the building. At least we were the owners for one night. I made my way to the park to think things through, being mindful not to snap my fingers. Was that where the money was coming from? I would snap my fingers, and when a bill appeared in my hand, it would disappear from the bank's vault. It was the only explanation I could think of. Perhaps the reason was that a bank, or rather the bank, was the only place that I could think of that actually had money. So, subconsciously, I was taking it from them and placing it in my hand. Well, it is a nice trick, I said aloud. A trick that I must never repeat, I told myself. I thought of other places that might have money lying around that could be plucked from thin air, but quickly dismissed the thought. That would be stealing no matter how it was done, and it would be something that I could not and would not do. I made my way home, trying to come up with another way to make some money that would save the building.
Mr. Reynolds!
I turned into the chest of a rather tall ape-like creature with a face that even a mother could not love. His huge hands had hold of my rather tender arm. I gulped. Yes?
The boss wants to have a word with you,
he said in a bad accent. The boss? I asked.
Yeah, so let's go,
he said, and began to push me along the street towards my building. Goliath and I entered the building and made our way up the stairs to Professor Kitzel's room. Ah, George, the professor said as we entered into his apartment. Gall, please wait outside until I call you, he told the giant, who obediently exited, closing the door behind him. Gall? I asked. Oh, that is just what I call him for short. His name really is Goliath, the professor said with a grin. Now, George, why don't you sit down and let's have a nice chat? He motioned towards a chair. May I get you something? Tea? Coffee? No thanks, I said as I sat down. Very well, he said, sitting opposite me. Why don't you tell me what happened to you today? I was arrested. The police dropped the charges, and I came home. I told him. Why were you arrested? He asked, his ears visibly perking up. I don't think that you will believe me, I said, my shoulders slumping. Oh, please, George, tell me, he said excitedly. Well, I began and proceeded to tell him the entire story. His smile grew wider as I told him the details of the last 2 days. My, he finally said after I was finished. That really is a remarkable story. Yes, quite remarkable. What's more, it fits very nicely into my plans. Well, if you don't mind, Professor, I would like to go home now, I said. Oh, no, George. We have many things to discuss. Oh, yes, many plans that have to be made, he said in a rather authoritative voice. I don't understand, I said. My boy, you have a rather unique talent. It is a talent that some men, some rather savory men, would think nothing of possessing. I, on the other hand, know exactly what we can do with that talent. No, Professor, I can't ever use it again. The money actually comes from somewhere else, like the bank. No, I don't actually make money. I steal it. No more. I refuse. The professor's face grew dark. I'm very sorry to hear that, George, he said, walking to the door and letting the giant in. Ghoul, I believe that George needs a rest, he told the giant, who smiled menacingly. You see, George, I really don't need you. Just your hand and your fingers, the professor said, taking out a large knife. Why couldn't I produce something useful like a gun or a big knife or better yet a bazooka? I began to snap my fingers furiously, producing bill after bill and throwing them at the two. The professor began to laugh, and the giant began to swat the bills away like flies. My fingers were getting sore, but I kept snapping, covering the two with money. George, that is amazing! Now please, stop this, the professor said, collapsing onto the floor from the gales of laughter. I kept snapping. The giant had stopped approaching me and was reaching down to help the professor up. A bill must have caught his temple just right as he collapsed on top of the old man. The professor let out a yell of surprise and pain. George, stop it, he screamed. I kept snapping faster and faster with bills piling up on top of the two. My fingers were sore and it began to bleed, but I kept going as bill after bill began to pile up. When I finally could stand it no more, I looked down at a rather large pile of money that had now completely covered the two men. There was no movement under the massive mound.
Death was caused by suffocation,
The detective told me later.
We found the diary that the old guy had kept, and as soon as he had found out about your, gift, he had made plans to cut off your hands, thinking that he could make the magic work.
The money? I asked.
All has been returned yet again. By the way, when we searched the apartment, we found a small cache in the floor, or at least I did. The old boy had been stashing money away for years, and since I happened to know the predicament that you were in, well...
The detective set down a small case. Inside was a rather large amount of money, enough to cover the mortgage and do some fixing up as well.
Besides, I can't take care of Mother, and this is the best place for her,
he said with a smile. Then, you mean that Mrs. Swanson's your...
She raised me, Mr. Reynolds. I guess you could just about cover that little debt.
Do I still have the power? Well, every once in a while I forget and snap my fingers. I try to only think about ones and fives from now on, and I try not to be near a bank when I do it. The little man that gave me this power? I never saw him again, and I hope to God that I never do. Epilogue. The butler did it.
Have you heard any good books lately? Audiobooks from Winslow Swan, now available on Spotify. If you'd like to support us, visit our merchandise store. T-shirts, caps, mugs, and so much more. Visit doorwaytonightmare.com today. Hey guys, this is Crimson.
And this is Swans. And we'd love to know what you think of the stories.
Even if it's bad.
So leave us a comment.
Or give us a thumbs up.
Thank you.